And unless she stuffs up or botches the VP pick or does something to circuit break this kind of love in, I mean, it might not be quite as feverish as it is right now, but I don't see it breaking. I think she's going to ride that coverage all the way to November. Hello, everyone. I'm John Fowler, the CEO of Intrigue Media and a former diplomat in China. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and with me, as always, is Jacob Shapiro, the Director of Geopolitical Analysis at Cognitive Investments. Jacob, we're still in this maelstrom, this whirlwind of political, I don't even know what to call it. President Biden withdrew, Kamala's the nominee. Big week.
Oh, I had COVID this week. I was wondering if it was all just a fever dream. Did Biden actually drop out? I'm behind the curveball here.
I mean, maybe we all had COVID at the same time and it's all just a simulation. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy enough that I almost believe that.
That's very close to the definition of fascism, I think. But maybe we move on from there.
Yeah, the less said about that, the better.
When last we left our heroes, before I had COVID and was a couple pounds heavier, Joe Biden was committed to staying in the race, and Donald Trump was feeling so confident in his prospects that he picked J.D. Vance as his running mate. Fast forward a week, and it's a very different campaign, and you get your first win over me on the show, John. Do diplomats normally celebrate their successes over their analysts? I don't know. We can get into that later. But Biden dropped the bomb over X over the weekend that he was dropping out of the race, and he endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. Endorsements are coming in, as are the dollars. So in total, Harris's team has raised more than $81 million in the 24-hour period since Biden's announcement. That's the largest 24-hour sum on either side in the 2024 campaign, and maybe the largest single day in U.S. history. One notable exception to the endorsement parade, and I'm sure we'll get into this, former U.S. President Barack Obama endorsed a process to find a nominee, not a nominee herself or himself. And the New York Post would have us believing that he is fuming at Biden's decision to back Harris. Anyway, I think there's two questions we have to tackle, John. Number one, is Kamala going to become the nominee, and does she have a chance against Trump? And sort of the second point is, if she can pull a victory out of her hat, what's her foreign policy going to be? How is she going to deal with China and Russia, the Middle East? To me personally, she's a cipher, and she hasn't really distinguished herself that much when it comes to foreign policy. She is, after all, the border czar. Not a really good time to be in charge of things at the border. But I'll let you take both of those in whatever order you want.
Well, you threw a ton at me there. New York Post reporting, which I'll let our viewers make up their minds on that quality of that source. But first things first, I do take a victory lap. You're never going to hear about the end of it, Jacob, that I was right on down to the hour almost. No, I'm kidding. First question: will she become president? I think she's got a really good chance. I think that's for two main reasons. One, I had always been down on Trump's ceiling. I think he is a kind of guy who really has a hard ceiling of support around the 43-ish% of Americans. I think a lot of that extra support and momentum was soft. I think it was almost an anti-Biden kind of soft support for Trump. And I think Kamala Harris has enough in her to kind of make sure that Trump doesn't exceed that ceiling, and she'll excite her base to get them out. So I think she has a path to it. I still put Trump ahead at this point. We don't have any polls. Polls probably can't be trusted for another week until they start coming in. But the second thing about why I think she can win is the media. I mean, if we're being apolitical, Jacob, it's a joke. The mainstream media right now is not covering a potential president credibly. It is a hagiographic victory parade if you read the media, and that's worth billions of dollars. It doesn't matter how much she raised. And I saw this morning she's up to about 130 million or something since she became the nominee, or the presumptive nominee. But she doesn't even need that money if the New York Times and CNN and everyone's going to just basically say how quickly she rallied the troops, how wonderful Biden is. It may all be true, but I mean, it's worth billions in coverage. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, her foreign policy, I agree with you. She's a bit of an unknown. That's kind of the job of a vice president, right? To sort of not let your feelings run in front of the president's. So I think you're right. I think she's going to potentially replace the leadership of Biden's foreign policy team, Jake Sullivan, potentially Blinken. This is speculation. She's close with Phil Gordon, who's a former State Department assistant secretary, so a serious guy who cut his teeth in Eastern Europe. But I agree. I don't think we know, and I think that's probably to her advantage. She's going to keep that the way until November. She's going to keep herself kind of not pinned down on anything, because what her goal now, Jacob, until November, is to take all the bits that is popular of the Biden administration and run away from the bits that aren't. And, that's much easier if no one really knows how she feels.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the theme of her entire life as a politician, though. It's not just that we don't know anything about her foreign policy because of her behavior over the last 3 years. It's also, I see nothing in her political career that tells me what her real sort of views are on things. Like, she has been all over the place and has been more far left when she was coming up in San Francisco, tracked more to the center when she was thinking about national office. And maybe that's good. I think the thing that she does have going for her is she can hit Trump where he's weakest. So now Trump is the old guy in the race, and now abortion can really be front and center, and that is an issue that does drive people to vote in general. But I can't help but think the Democrats missed an opportunity here in their rush to crown Kamala. And you're absolutely right. I mean, watch how the media went from talking about Joe Biden like he was an old dotard who couldn't talk to now he's Cincinnatus going back to the farm and the hero of the American Republic in the same breath as George Washington, and Kamala is anointed. I think that's going to wear off fairly soon. But I'm reminded of something I heard on Hacks on Tap, which is a great U.S. domestic politics podcast. They talked about how this was the sugar high of the Kamala campaign, but a sugar high, they just need it to last until November. If the sugar high can last to November, maybe it's going to be good. It also, sort of raises, if there's a debate or if there's some kind of squaring off between Trump and Harris, how things are going to go. But I do think the Dems missed an opportunity to have a process. I think Obama sort of classically had the right idea, but this isn't the 1920s, Barack. Like, you can't just organize things behind the scenes like a big Chicago mob boss
with a big cigar in his mouth. No, I agree with most of what you've said there. I do think that she's got a very short campaign that benefits her, as you said. I think I actually have come down on the side that she was the right choice, and an open convention wasn't worth the risk, because I think the Trump side will try to portray her as chaotic, unable to manage her staff. That's an open secret here in Washington, that she's tough to work for. And I think an open convention in which she emerged from it as the candidate would be more divisive. And I think that would probably play into the Trump attack of, like, you can't trust this person to lead. So I think it's probably the best solution the Dems can have. And here's where I also maybe disagree with you a little bit, is like, I don't see this coverage stopping until November. Trump's not going to help himself. We know that. He's already come out on rallies and said crazy things and stuff that's going to drive away those moderate supporters. And unless she stuffs up or botches the VP pick or does something to circuit break this kind of love in, I mean, it might not be quite as feverish as it is right now, but I don't see it breaking. I think she's going to ride that coverage all the way to November, which, again, we know once the media is on your side, it's tough to lose an election. But I don't know.
I'm just reminded of what my fellow Louisianian James Carville has always said, which is, it's all about the economy, stupid. And if you look at the polls, one poll that I pulled up yesterday when I was prepping, 88% of Americans say inflation is the most pressing issue that they are dealing with. And this is the thing. Kamala was VP of the administration that oversaw the economy. I think we can talk about whether the economy is actually that bad or not. I think maybe the electorate's in a fever dream about how good the economy should be. But, like, she doesn't have a good record to stand on. And eventually, like, that's going to matter. And I also would tell you that, those 10,000, 15,000 swing voters in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they're not reading the gray lady. They don't give a shit what the New York Times says. They're thinking about other things, and she's going to have to make the case to them in a way that Biden could. When he could speak normally in full sentences, that was where he was best, chumming it up with the Midwesterners. Like, Kamala's going to have to learn how to do that, or find her somebody who can.
Yeah. Next time I want you to do that in a Carville impression, please, because I could listen to that man talk all day. He's hysterical. Yesterday, here in D.C., I arrived to protests all up and down the mall, snarled traffic, and that was because Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu was addressing Congress yesterday afternoon, of course, and there were considerable counter-protests, some which were pretty horrific, if you ask for my personal opinion, with Hamas graffiti scribbled all across monuments and things like that, but largely peaceful. It's safe to say his address to Congress was a controversial move. A bunch of lawmakers protested. I think one of them from Minnesota, her name escapes me, was holding up a war criminal sign. Nancy Pelosi none other came out afterwards and said it's the single worst speech made by a foreign leader in Congress's history. So she wasn't impressed. And Netanyahu, the gist of his speech was that he basically said that Hamas was part of a much larger conflict between Iran, the United States. He tried to really elevate Israel's conflict with Hamas to a common fight that the United States has in the region, and that America must continue to defend Israel and defend freedom, their common values. I wonder what you made of it. Netanyahu's meeting with Biden, I think, today. He is going to meet with Vice President Kamala Harris as well. And Donald Trump, of course, tomorrow down in the Casa de Trump. What do you make of all this?
Well, first, I'm going to answer a question with a question. Did you know this? I read this in the Washington Post this week, that one U.S. official told the Washington Post that the Netanyahus are the only foreign leaders who bring suitcases of dirty laundry for the U.S. to clean while they're in town, because the U.S. cleans laundry for foreign leaders as they're here, because it's busy. You're traveling all over the place. Most times it's for a night or two. The Netanyahus bring their dirty laundry for the U.S. to wash. I don't know if you also know this. Laundry bills were actually a big point in Israel's elections in 2016, when Netanyahu sued his own office and Israel's attorney general to prevent the release of their laundry bills under the country's Freedom and Information Act. They weren't so lucky about his wife's ice cream bills. I could get into that all day. So, John, the first question I have is, did you bring your laundry?
No, I didn't, and I regret it. I should have brought them. I've just dropped it off at Blair House, opposite the White House there.
Yeah. What's going on with that? I mean, who wouldn't want that much ice cream and free laundry if you can get it? Hot diggity. I mean, there's a lot of awful jokes I could make. I also, one thing that struck out to me, this was Netanyahu's fourth address to a joint session of Congress. That breaks Winston Churchill's record for foreign leaders. And I'm going to come back to that, because if you want my takeaway, something is fundamentally broken if Netanyahu has spoken more times to Congress than Winston Churchill. Look, Netanyahu, in some sense, one of his great political strengths in the Israeli electorate is that he's seen as the guy who understands the United States. He speaks very good, fluent English. His father was an academic at Cornell University, my alma mater. He was educated in the United States. He feels very at home here. He's always sort of been able to navigate the relationship with the U.S. well. He's 74 years old. I think he's out of touch. And I think you can see in the speech he's out of touch. He's dealing with the United States of the 1980s and 1990s, which he was very, very good at dealing with. That's not the United States we have anymore. And that was one of my first takeaways. The man is speaking to Joe Biden. He's not speaking to the folks that just threw Joe Biden out of the driver's seat. So that's number one. Number two, he spoke a lot about the common values between the United States and Israel and the relationship, and how their common values is the reason that they should work together to destroy Hamas and Iran and everything else. What a joke. So I'm a geopolitical analyst, but common values is not, I think, what actually forges relationships between nations. And what forged the relationship between the United States and Israel was them being on the same side of the Cold War in the 1960s and 1970s. Because before the 60s and 70s, Israel and the United States were not close. Actually, the United States was a problem for Israel in the 1950s when you think about the Suez Campaign and things like that. It was only in the context of the Cold War and all the Arab states turning towards the Soviet Union that the United States and Israel developed their special relationship. And I think the problem that Netanyahu has is that the common interests in the relationship are breaking down. And you're not going to fix that by coming to Congress and talking about common values that people don't agree about. I think the biggest problem here for Netanyahu, and this is from Pew, total, the U.S. electorate, 55% have a favorable rating of Israel, 41% unfavorable. The younger you are, the worse your opinions are on Israel. So 18 to 29, that's 41% favorable, 56% unfavorable. Look at the opposite. Look at how Israelis think about the United States. It's 83% favorable and 16% unfavorable. So honestly, if you're Israeli, you should be quaking in your boots that Netanyahu does not understand that Israel's losing the hearts and minds and the interests of the U.S. government. And this speech, I mean, we were talking about fever dreams earlier. Seems to me like Netanyahu's having a fever dream. He's talking to a country that no longer exists.
You've made a ton of interesting points that I actually haven't considered before. So I'll try to respond to them in real time with the caveat that I might not make a lot of sense. But I think there's a couple of things. One, I completely agree that Netanyahu he's lost the plot, hasn't he? I don't know whether he's lost his political deafness, his famed political deafness, because he's never really been in the position where he's held to such ransom by such far-right extremists in his own government. He's had to deal with building coalitions before, but probably not quite to this extent. And I don't know whether that means he's he's lost a step, or if he's just old and he's been around for too long. I suspect that might be the case. As to Israel losing the hearts and minds of Americans, I wonder how much of this is severable to Netanyahu. Netanyahu has, unlike any other Israeli leader in, well, modern times, but you could argue basically all time, Netanyahu has name recognition, but he has name recognition now for overwhelmingly negative reasons. I think even, I mean, and you can, and maybe you can speak to this more persuasively than I can, but I think amongst moderate, reasonable-minded Jewish people in America, they're not fans of Netanyahu anymore. They don't believe he's taking Israel in the right direction. They see a lot of problems. That's the same with a lot of moderate Israelis. So I wonder if Netanyahu goes, whether that relationship repairs itself pretty quickly. Because I do, as a former diplomat, I take your point about the analyst in you focuses on shared interests. That's the hard power. That's what decision makers in the halls of power focus on. How you communicate that to people is shared values. As an Australian who lives in America, the debate about what Australian interests in the world are is very much drowned out in the public sphere in Australia by how much we love America, how much we watch your TV, how much we love freedom, how much we love the opportunity that you guys provide. So I agree with you that what matters when you make decisions is interest, but I wouldn't discount the power of saying shared interest. And I think, shared cultural values when you're talking to a public audience. And I think Netanyahu was talking to an Israeli audience first and foremost. I think that was his chief goal here. But what I agree with you full-throatedly on is that he has lost a step, and he thinks that the argument that America has a shared interest in fighting Hamas in the way that Israel is currently conducting that war, he thinks that's persuasive. And I think that almost everybody sees that and goes, get out of here, man.
Let's say Kamala pulls it out of the hat. Let's say that she walks into the White House. If I was an analyst advising her new Secretary of State or something like that, I would sum up the position here in one or two sentences. Stop letting Israel bring you their dirty laundry and open up some communications with Turkey and Iran, the two most important countries for the future of the region. Full stop. And that's what should scare the crap out of Israelis if they were watching that.
A credible threat.
So let's move away from the most inconsequential and best covered event of the week to the most consequential and least covered, at least from my point of view. And this is the Mexico-U.S. China love triangle we're talking about. There are a couple different things that happened this past week, and some of them revolve around Trump, and then one of them has to do with China. First, Mexico's president-elect, Claudia Sheinbaum, she took to Twitter to give a little jab at Donald Trump, because Trump, it's unclear if he was actually making fun of Mexico's former foreign minister, if he was actually making fun of Joe Biden and just stumbled up his words because he's really old and he has trouble actually communicating things. But at any point, he might have called the former Mexican foreign minister a stupid person with a low IQ. And Sheinbaum took to X and said, I regret his language. To me, he's been one of the best public servants in Mexico. No one should forget that Mexico is free and sovereign. Shots fired right there across the bow between Mexico and the United States. Number two, AMLO, Mexico's current president who's outgoing, called Donald Trump a friend and said that he would be writing to him soon to warn him against pledging to close the border or blaming migrants for bringing drugs into the United States. Good luck, AMLO. And if you can change Donald Trump's mind with a letter, I'd like to know who's ghostwriting for you, and maybe we can have them over at Intrigue or in some of my writing for my clients. But last but not least, and this is maybe the most interesting, Mexico's finance minister over last weekend was at a conference where Sheinbaum, AMLO were all there, and he talked about how the country needs to review its trade relationship, not with the United States, but with China, because it isn't reciprocal. He talked about Plan Mexico and about a new awareness in Mexico that it needs to be self-sufficient and that North America needs to be self-sufficient as a whole because it consumes too much from China and depends way too much on basic products on importing from China in general. John, for me, and this might be as a result of the fact that I'm American, but to me, the U.S.-Mexico relationship is arguably the most consequential bilateral relationship in the world here over the next couple of years, and the future of U.S.-Mexico relations is critically important. I wonder what you make of these stories, because some of them suggest there's friction there, and then that last one, though, suggests, like Mexico knows where its economy is focused on. It's focused on the United States. It's not about to turn to China like, say, Brazil did this past week when it was opening up talks to join Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I don't know that I would say it's the most consequential relationship in the world, but I certainly think it is probably got the biggest delta between how important people think it is and how important it actually is, because I don't think there's enough focus on it. I mean, just to go back to the start of your introduction there, I saw Donald Trump also, or at least the it might have been JD Vance, but the RNC ticket recently floated that idea of attacking cartels in Mexico again, which obviously is a problematic bit of rhetoric for the Mexican government to have their neighbor threatening military strikes on their sovereign soil. I also saw that migrant crossings are down quite a lot in the last 6 to 8 weeks. I don't have the figures to hand, but this idea, there is a suggestion that the Mexican government has been able to limit this phenomenon. Now, obviously, it's the middle of summer, so there's tons of other things that I don't understand well enough about why that figure might be coming down. But if there's a suggestion that the Mexican government can influence the flow of those people in an election cycle, in which that will be one of the key issues, I think that's really, I would watch that as an indication of where the relationship might go for the next 4 years. And on the China stuff, you've nailed it. That is where Mexico's bread is buttered. They understand that their relationship with America economically is pretty much game, set, and match for them, right? And if they can kind of add to the global narrative of nearshoring, friendshoring, saying, hey, everybody, we need to get less focused on China because they're a geopolitical risk. And oh, by the way, guess where you should put your factories, guess where you should put your supply chains. That benefits them in the short, medium, and long term. So I wasn't surprised by that. And I think that will be the common thread of the relationship. I think that benefits America. And as long as they can manage, if I was a Mexican advisor, I'd be saying, we need to just keep this border issue, just like, don't let it get too much where a US president or a US Congress is forced to take radical action to stop it because it becomes such a political issue. And it's getting close.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Mexican finance minister said that shortly after the Republican National Convention, which we talked about last week, because in Donald Trump's, however long that speech was, longest speech in convention history, one of the things he said was, hey, China's building these factories in Mexico. He didn't say that they should then leave Mexico. What did he say? He said, we want those factories in the United States. Yeah. We don't want those factories going to Mexico. We want to employ U.S. auto workers with Mexican money, which, by the way, I applaud that pragmatism. But I bet that woke some folks up in Mexico City because they were like, huh? Like, we need to make sure that we are on the same side of the China issue in case that version of Trump walks into the White House.
All right, Jacob, on to our final story. And we go to Southeast Asia and Vietnam. This news kind of flew under the radar, I would say, in mainstream media, and it's that Nguyen Phu Trong, and I truly apologize to Vietnamese people out there if my pronunciation is horrific, which I imagine it is, died last Friday, aged 80 after a period of illness. Now, he was the secretary of the Communist Party, the leader of or the de facto leader of the Communist Party of Vietnam, and Vietnam's Communist Party works a lot like China's. We don't really know where the power lies, we guess, but internecine politics in Vietnam is very opaque. But I think it's a pretty big deal. I think so. He's handed over his duties to President To Lam because that's the chain of succession in Vietnam. But it's a big deal because he's been a big true believer in the Communist Party running Vietnam. He led for a rare 3 terms since 2011, so that's a huge amount of time in power. So he's left his mark on the country. And he also ran as president. And then recently, I think Intrigue wrote maybe a few months ago, that there have been some really interesting reports of political infighting in Vietnam, that something like what's gone down in China in terms of an anti-corruption drive has been going on in Vietnam. And there's been a real power struggle. And now you have the head honcho, who probably kept a lid on most things, pass away. Big story, or am I kind of overblowing an unimportant country and something that doesn't matter?
I think you're underselling it. So you know that my day job is in the investment space, and that's where I do a lot of things. And there's not a whole lot of investing in public equity markets in Vietnam. I mean, there's some ETFs, whatever else. But I do also have some consulting clients who are multinational corporations with international supply chains. And for every single one of them, this is code red. And it's been code red since the beginning of the year. Every time we talk, it's what's going on in Vietnam. What have you heard about Vietnam? What's happening there with the corruption scandals, all these other things. So if you are a major company and you are moving your supply chains from China to somewhere else, Vietnam was the top of your list. So if you're Apple, you're Amazon, you're all the big guys, like they are all thinking about, okay, well, Vietnam is at the top of our list. And the quiet thing that's happened in the last couple of years is that Vietnam has run out of gas. and it's run out of gas because Trong, may he rest in peace, oversaw this quote unquote blazing furnace anti-corruption investigation, very much like Xi Jinping's purges immediately after he came to power in general. And I think it's helpful to think of Trong as Vietnam's version of Xi, except older, and now he's dead. So it's an interesting comparison case between what happens when you have change at the top of leadership in a communist party, like in a China, like in a Vietnam, maybe like in a North Korea, although that's stretching it a little bit. Now, one of the problems has been Vietnamese officials have become so worried about getting embroiled in these corruption scandals. And I mean, it's felled presidents, it's felled top figures, that they've basically paused all construction. And Vietnam's out of capacity. You want to move your factory to Vietnam today? It may sound like a good idea, but they don't have the roads. They don't have the spare energy capacity. They're not building the factories and things like that because everyone was on hold because of this backroom fighting. Now, you're exactly right. Vietnam is a black box. So I don't know which of the two scenarios I'm about to outline for you is true, but there's two potential scenarios. Number one, for the first 7 months of this year while Trong was sick, the knives have been out. And the different factions have been fighting against each other. And we have this new president who has a background in public security and who was overseeing the corruption furnace, who has now taken over. And we're looking at a Vietnam that maybe is less open to foreign business in general, or at least is going to be more stable. So that's sort of door number one. Door number two is now the knives are going to come out. Mm-hmm. Now he's dead. And you've got this guy who's the caretaker, but all the different factions are maybe going to start trying to figure out how to get to the top of the Vietnamese power structure. Impossible to know which it is. It looks to me like it's maybe number one because things haven't broken out that much. But when you're thinking about major mega trends like nearshoring and the exit from China and manufacturing and supply chains, all these other things, this is ground zero where those things intersect with local politics. And it's a hard story to tell. It's why it's not on the front page of a lot of different papers. It is a crucial one. And if you actually have boots on the ground, if you're actually trying to make stuff in real time, this type of thing is more important than anything else that has happened in the last 2 weeks.
I think I don't have anything to add to that other than if you take one thing away from this episode, it is political. This is why geopolitics matters outside of nerdy analysts in Washington D.C. think tanks. Upheaval at the top of a country in which you've been planning your 5, 10, 20-year supply chain plans could affect what you're doing. They're stopping construction. You have no idea what the rules will be tomorrow, 5 months, 6 months, a year from now. This is why this stuff matters. We don't have any answers for you because we don't know what's going to happen, but you need to be watching, you need to stay nimble, you need to be flexible, you need to be ready for anything. All right, Jacob, before we wrap up, I got a chance to say why I think Kamala Harris has a pretty good shot. Quickly, what do you put her chances are at winning the election in November? What do you think she needs to do to win the election in November? And why am I correct about everything that I've predicted?
Well, yeah, I mean, you were right last time, so I don't know why I should weigh in here. It's, it actually makes sense that the Australian would have a better take on U.S. politics than the American, because the hardest thing for an analyst is to get distance from the place that you are. Absolutely. No matter how objective you are, it's really hard to get that. Look, I think we're too early. Like we don't have her VP pick. We don't know what the convention's going to look like. Is it going to be a mess? Is Obama going to come out and protest, or others going to come out and protest? Are they all going to like Kamala? How's the electorate going to respond to her? Based on what we know right now, and based on the campaign she ran in 2019, I'd make it 80-20 in favor of Trump at this point. I don't see how she is going to win in the places where the Democrats are weakest and need it. So that's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Like, I don't see how she picks up votes there. She's certainly not going to pick up votes in Arizona because she did a bad job as migrations are. And those are the states that you're going to have to win in order to be in the White House. And the other thing, and I said this earlier, I think it just bears repeating, she was the vice president for a government that, whether it's fair or not, a vast majority of the electorate thinks that Trump would manage the economy better. That's the one thing that Trump has always had, for all of his crazy statements and for all his narcissism and for all the terrible things that he's done. People think that he's good at running the economy. And I don't know how Kamala burst through that. Maybe she can make it about abortion. Maybe she can put someone next to her on the ticket who can go to those Midwestern battleground states and win it. Maybe I'm underestimating the extent to which people are fed up with Trump, and maybe Trump's going to slip on a taco salad and this will all be for naught, but it's very, very hard for me to see how she does it.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. 80-20 in favor of Trump, and disagreement between us is good for the program, good for the channel, Jacob. Juices the algorithm. With that,
it turns out it's not so good for my career because you've been right so far. But we'll
I mean, a broken clock is right twice a day. On that note, Jacob, we will be back next week. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. And thank you as always, Jacob, for your time.
Cheers.